Welcome to everyone who's joined this Q&A, and welcome again to Shaunak Sen, director of this amazing multi-award winning film, All That Breathes. I'm ANITA KHANNA. I'm a documentary producer, an impact producer, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Climate Story Lab Southern Africa. I'm based in Johannesburg. I grew up in London, which accounts for my accent, but I was actually born in Delhi, where this story takes place, and I left Delhi as a young child to go and live in London. Enough about me. Just want to say that the Climate Story Lab Southern Africa is part of an international collaboration of climate storytellers and an initiative of the formidable Dark Society, which I'm sure many of you know about or have worked with. And also on this Q&A are the co-directors from Climate Story Lab Southern Africa, Mickey Redlinghuis and Liani Marstorp. And Liani, who has been photobombed by her cat since this call has started, who definitely wants to get in on the discussion about the rights of all that breathes. She's going to facilitate this Q&A with me. So just, Shaunak, just to let you know who's also most likely on the call. I can't see the participants right now, but the people that have joined us from Cape Town would have actually had the chance to see the film at the Encounters Film Festival. But the people in Johannesburg are only going to be seeing the film on Sunday. So there's some people calling in who haven't seen the film, but I'm sure through this discussion are going to get even more inspired in a can't wait kind of way to see the movie and hopefully pass the message. And I really do encourage people to get their tickets very soon, because I think it might sell out if it hasn't already. Many of the people listening in are actually filmmakers themselves and or certainly lovers of great cinema. I just wanted to give you some context of who we're talking to today. Also probably live on Facebook as well. But there's a key reason why we've invited you, Shaunak, and that's because many of us are also very interested in the role that film can play in influencing social change, particularly through the lens of climate justice. I think we should see the trailer before we go any further, particularly for those people that haven't seen the film, and just to remind us of the texture of this beautiful tapestry of experience that Shaunak has woven for us. Can we play the trailer, please?
जब हम पहली चील घर लाए, मैं देर रात जागकर उसे घूरता था। खूंखार रेप्टाइल लगती थी किसी और प्लेनेट से।
मैंने अपनी पूरी लाइफ इसको डिवोट कर दिया है। पे चश्मा ले गई मेरा।
क्या है इसको?
उंगली क्यों दिखा रही है मुझे तू? मेरे ऊपर एहसान कर रही है क्या? तो भाई अगर हम अंदर जाके लेटेंगे तो चीलें हमें भी खाएंगी क्या? जाके लेट के देख ले।
जिंदगी खुद एक तरह की रिश्तेदारी है। हम सब हवा की बिरादरी हैं। जो जो चीजें सांस लेती हैं उनमें कोई फर्क नहीं दिखना चाहिए।
Oh, it's fantastic. Absolutely amazing. Shaunak, let's dive straight into the discussion. I wanted to start really with where the film begins. I really love the opening scene of this film. I think it says so much about the meta-narrative. And just to describe it quickly to people that haven't seen the film, it's small animals, insects, rats, I think a dog, on a kind of a piece of wasteland, shot quite close, the camera tracking alongside. So it's a scene of living, surviving, adapting to a human world because they're mingling in with rubbish. And it just made me think, you know, we so often perceive nature in these forms like rats, mosquitoes, etc., as things that encroach upon us. But the film, like the visual language of the film, seems to always be reminding us that we are actually the encroachers. Almost every shot is about this dance between human society and all that was before us, before we came along. So could you please start by just telling us some of the decisions you made about the visual language in the film? I'm also thinking about how when you juxtapose that with, for example, that amazing shot of the aeroplane going across the puddle in the middle of that kind of scene. So could you just please start with telling us about the visual language?
Sure. So, well, firstly, let me just say thank you so much, Anita and Liani and Darren, for hosting this. I'm really excited because I haven't screened in the country before, I think. So I'm quite excited to be showing here. And this is most definitely my first conversation. And it's also lovely to see cats and dogs in the frame, and it feels very thematic and topical. To talk you through what the genesis of the film was. So I think it initially began with, you know, when you live in the city of Delhi, you're sort of, whether you're conscious of it or not, constantly aware of the tactile, visceral, heavy, thick nature of the air itself. You know, the skies are this kind of a gray, monochromatic haze, and you always have these tiny dots gliding in the sky, which are the black kites. And almost everybody is sort of, so initially what came to my head was this kind of a texture or tone of life where you feel like the air conditioners of spaceship Earth have gone awry, you know, and something is deeply wrong. And this feeling that, you know, it's almost like a close lifelong friend has suddenly stopped being friendly and has suddenly become hostile to you, because suddenly the world itself is, you know, no longer a neutral backdrop, but inserting itself into our lives as a kind of a hostile force. And it causes a kind of a, you know, like a existential rift almost. It's a kind of sense of dread and all of that. But at the same time, you're also interested in what this means for us in terms of our everyday acts of, you know, soldiering on and bravery and all of that. So alongside this, I was also interested in a kind of, philosophically or conceptually, I was interested in thinking of human non-human entanglement or kinship, or the kind of neighborliness between human and non-human lives. And it just so happened that I was looking for people with a deep or a profound relationship with the skies. And that's when I came upon the work of the protagonists, that is the brothers, Nadeem and Saud. And, you know, once you've gone into that tiny basement where they work and where they've treated over 15 to 20,000 black kites in the last 10 odd years, it's, you know, it's just such a tiny derelict space, and it's very cinematic, and, you know, it reminds you of Tarkovsky and all of that. So, you know, I think vaguely that's how the film began. It's impossible to really put a finger on when a non-fiction doc begins, right? Because it's like a free fall. It's like jumping off a cliff. And
Yeah.
for the remainder of the 3 years, when we took about 3 years to shoot and about 8 months to edit, you know, you're looking at the world through the delirious demon eyes of the subject matter, and you know, everything just takes over, and your life becomes raw material for the film, and the film becomes a lens through which you look at the world. And the visual language sort of developed organically, in that all I knew was that the main idea in this film was simultaneity of life, or in a kind of context of urban ecology.
Mm.
And in that, we had to be able to focus on human non-human life as a kind of entanglement, you know, like, so it means that we had to have these slow, fluid, dreamy cinematic shots of pans, or, and you know, this kind of a cinema language where we don't cut, but in the same shot show a snail slowly moving and like these raucous fires at the back, or you know, like a turtle slowly clambering through trash, and you see the traffic zipping past, and all in the same shot, because the idea was to kind of like stitch the two together through some kind of a cinematic, to invoke this kind of neighborliness, or this one line that is in the film, that we are all a community of air.
Mm.
But more than that, the challenge of this sort of film is that you have to, you know, you can't only be preaching to the choir. So it can't be that you're making a film only for people who are interested in either ecology or the socio-political situation in that part of the world. You have to be able to speak to people who love cinema, you know. So, and it's your job to not be pedantic or didactic or moralistic, because then you're just, you know, you can't really hold the audience by the collar and say, feel bad because this is important, you know. So film language in that sense, in terms of developing or finding beauty and moments of some kind of sublime textures, is important. And that was the, but all of this is, you know, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, because style comes intuitively and organically, and it evolves slowly, and you know, it's like a slow drizzle of
Mm.
recognition on top of your head. So it wasn't a premeditated thing at all. It sort of evolved slowly and came into, you know, it was in its birth canal for a while, and then finally evolved.
Thank you. It does come together. It evolves beautifully, and it feels like there's times when everyone, whether it's humans or non-humans, animals, creatures, is treated equally by the camera. At some point, there's a shot where there's a guy, I think, having a shower in the street, and it's just, you know, everything's kind of just passing with treated observationally in a very equal way. The focus isn't on that, it's, you know. But I just want to go back to the brothers for a second, and another key scene at the beginning of the film where one of the brothers is in the workshop, and it's setting the tone of another layer that you do, which are these really deep conversations that they have, right? So we first meet him in the surgery, I think, with his assistant, and they're discussing nuclear war. You know, it's like a what if this happens conversation, and it feels left field in the sense that, you know, there's this environmental film, and they're talking about war, nuclear war, and, you know, geopolitics, but it also introduces that element of the verite that we're going to see all the way through, and it feels very real. It is very real. It's the kind of conversations that I certainly have. I could relate to it, and the ear is listening to world politics, but the eye is drawn to the work. So there's so much going on in one scene in this dank little surgery, and there are so many scenes like that throughout the film. So could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the brothers? Like, what kind of access did you have to get that kind of verite? to have those scenes that are shot in a very natural way? Like, what did you have to do as a filmmaker? How did it work?
Well, initially, access is really a function of time, as is the quality of your observational verite material. We shot for 3 years. So initially, like the first month actually it's all trash. When the material is all trash, because everybody is too self-conscious and they're projecting the cells that they want to curate in front of the camera. And you are also finding your language and all of that. But it's a very important rites of passage, because you have to, reach that critical mass of boredom and self-consciousness. So you're actually waiting to bore the subjects. You have to show up every day so you can really bore them by your presence, to a point where the camera is not a obtrusive presence anymore, and they're frankly bored of you. And I mean, the joke in the crew is that you have to wait for the first yawn. And once you've got that first sort of like absolute moment of boredom is when you realize the real material comes, where characters are being instead of behaving in front of the camera. And you need that kind of, you need a quality of quotidian time that is soaked in that texture of banality. That's what the main ambition of this form is. The thing is that because you also spoke about the quality of the caliber of the conversations, I realized that the two brothers are also like philosophers of the urban, and they have a take on thinking of the city as an ecological extreme ecosystem that almost nobody has. I mean, in an alternate life, I also have a sort of academic, like I also have a PhD and so on. So I realized that this level of acuity of thought one doesn't really encounter even in a lot of philosophy books, because they have a unique kind of a purchase on the world. But having said that, it's not just always heavy and, stodgy. The younger assistant, Salik, whose glasses get taken away by the bird, he actually is like just brings in such an air of freshness and levity and comicality almost, because he says the most random, absurd things, right? So even the conversation that you invoked, where what would happen if there's a nuclear war, what would happen to the birds? And the thing is that the life that you encountered in that tiny, derelict, grubby basement is that it's a intermeshing of the extremely philosophical, where they're talking about these dense ideas of human, non-human relationships. But at the same time, this kind of a wry sort of style of absurd random conversations. And I thought that would be a good way to sort of like inaugurate the film, to capture that kind of a texture of the random and the fleeting, whilst also sort of, like keeping track of the bigger, more zoomed out ideas that they very frequently talk about. And I mean, it's sounding like I've done something cool, but I just want to like qualify that. The thing is that you see, architectonically, I found a sort of space where it's a tiny basement, right? Like 7 feet by 8 feet or lesser, in fact. And that basement is where all of the city's birdfall, all of Delhi's birdfall comes. So in a way, it provides a kind of a neat visual diagram of cutting between extreme compression and extreme decompression, right? Extreme claustrophobia and cutting to the open vistas of the city and the skies of the city. So, which has a certain effect aesthetically, because it's a little like inhaling and exhaling, right? It's a little like breathing in, breathing out. So it aesthetically has an effect, but also conceptually it allows you discipline, because you can really lean into conversations and heavy ideas when you're in the basement. And then it's a dance between a sense of open looseness when you're at this point of the sky. So it gives a kind of discipline, and it allowed a kind of, a sort of formal design on the film, which was intrinsic to or salient to the space itself. Because these are not things that you can inorganically crowbar in. You can't impose these things in at all. These are things where, through slow thinking and through time, the space and the characters say things to you. And then it's a real dance to try and be able to capture the trace of that in the inherent form of the film.
Yeah. Thank you. And just like one final question from me in this first bit before I move on to Liani is similar to the theme of what I said initially about the visual language showing how we've encroached upon all that came before us. You treat politics in a similar way. I think I've heard you talking about the outside leaking in. Does that sound familiar to you? I mean, it's explicit sometimes in the family conversations. India's on a knife edge politically. Like anybody who knows anything about what's happening in India right now knows that, but it's in your film, but it's not explicitly there. It's never kind of boom, you know, this is a topic that we're covering in the film. It creeps in. But it is, I think, you know, the biggest societal issue in India today, the Islamophobia, Modi's government presenting a very sort of top-down existential threat to democracy and to the lives of Indian Muslims. Can you just talk about your decisions around how you treated this outside world leaking into the story?
Well, firstly, I do remember that phrase as a part of my answer. I went through an absolutely grueling Oscar campaign where I must have given about 200 interviews. So at some point, you know, the answers just come out by rote. And this is not that. This conversation is not that. Well, the thing is that the film was always meant to be primarily ecological and philosophical. Like it was conceptual in its main concerns. And however, because the city of Delhi during the time was just going through such a tumultuous period that, but at the same time, you see, you don't want to in any way impose a sociological or a political reading on the lives that you're shooting. You have to trust the integrity and authenticity of what you're shooting, and you don't want to, you know, and the brothers are not political beings. So it's not like the film should not and ought not to have been an overtly, by which I mean a conventionally, frontally political film, which it is expressly not. And the reason was that the brothers would say they're political in the sense of the relationship between humans and birds, you know. However, the outside world would sort of like dribble in slow sort of leaks. So a character goes to the balcony and you hear the sound of a protesting crowd somewhere. You don't know what it is, but essentially that's how I experienced it. You know, the world, like there was some kind of turbulence outside, which we couldn't really, unless you really looked went out and asked. You could sense that there was something like the epistemic wallpaper of their lives was not smooth, not like there was clearly some sort of thing going on. But at the same time, I had to respect how I witnessed it. So it was oblique and tangential. And you sense that they're going about their day and collecting birds, even though the city is on the boil. And for the longest time, I sort of arm wrestled with should one put in more of a context of water? Because, you know, but then the truth is that I actually don't like films that are very, you know, sometimes films that end up pamphleteering do more disservice to the subject. And there are different ways in which you can enter the life worlds of things. And sometimes the slight or like presence in a minor key is a better thing than a kind of a frontal sledgehammer to things. So that's what the form eventually became about. And also, you know, it's like I had to respect that the film is about the human non-human relationship and the work of these brothers, and everything else is like a footnote or a whisper, which is not elided or eschewed, and it's very, very I would say sensorially present, but it's just that you don't bludgeon people with it. And that's really now become a thing that I deeply believe in.
And I think that it you know, it's a gift certainly to climate storytelling, the fact that you can reach really diverse audiences with this film, not just people that would traditionally go and see a film about conservation.
I think it's very important to not be programmatic about what you're making a film about. I don't think it helps for anybody to have a kind of a slogan or a card holding this thing saying, I am making a climate film or an environment. It's like you make films about things that are truly substantial in the world. And the world is not just the front brain or the conceptual. It's stimuli of all kinds, and it's also your back brain. And when you really get into you really stay with the trouble and get into the muck of things, you realize that you can't really, if you make a film on just an issue, then it becomes thin and wispy and superficial. And because life isn't divided by the taxonomic categories that we make because of our the disciplinary sort of divisions that we live in, a genuinely reflexive or a meditative work will never be about one thing. I'm sure all our favorite films are never about one issue. So I think it's good to have a cloud of ideas above one's head, but not to march ahead to the drum roll of any one theme or any one so if you had asked me if I was making a film on pollution I would have absolutely resoundingly said no. But the ecological was part of the hyperlinks of ideas. But you have to not let any one thing become the lens through which you look at the world.
I want to ask you more questions. I might get a chance later on. Liani, I know that you've got some things that you want to ask. I'm going to pass over to Liani. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. So I gather from your reaction earlier that the campaign drive heading to those big awards like the Oscars is as dehumanizing as I've heard from other filmmakers. So Climate Story Lab, South Africa, we work predominantly on two aspects. We work with creatives on story, and then we help them incubate a distribution strategy with the aim of creating change. And, as you know, research has proven that what we all feel in our gut, and that's that it's really difficult to get people to change their behavior, let alone policy. It's not facts that drive change, it's emotion that does. And like you, we believe that speaking to viewers' hearts or the backs of their brains and not slapping them in the face with the issue is the key. The popularity of your film really bears out how well you've succeeded in creating a compelling film that people want to watch. And that's a dream for an impact producer, because an impact campaign is only as strong as the film that's at its center. The film has to be compelling. Audiences have to want to watch it. I think maybe there's some people who think that a commercial distribution strategy, festival, awards, that sort of strategy is in opposition to an impact strategy, to using the film for some kind of targeted social change. But I really believe that the strongest campaigns come from integrating them. And there are many instances where you can use the festivals and awards and all of these things to leverage change. So your film has won so many awards and it really is playing in the A-League. What benefit do you think a festival and awards run like this could have for the conversations around the issues? And I know that you've said that the film isn't just about one thing, and that is absolutely true. But since this is the Climate Story Lab supported session, I want to ask you about climate. Do you think that the film can, or that its success can benefit the climate conversation?
Of course, but I mean, let me come at it differently. So the thing is that this is the Climate Story Lab, and story is as important a part of the name as climate is. And there's a reason that this is not the climate academic lab or the climate, like all the other things that it could be. I very, very strongly believe that our job as artists is to respect the art itself, and everything that happens after will happen. In the sense that it's very important to not, it's almost like the classic thing where a band can't decide we're going to make a hit song and then make a song, right? You put in what is private to you and what really moves you and what really intuitively feels powerful and holds sway over you emotionally, conceptually, philosophically, and put that out into the world. And it's it's the integrity of that authentic truth that you feel that then finds ripples and receivers and gets embedded into the world, right? This might sound like it's woo-woo, but this is actually the most organic truth of the work that we make. So I don't, firstly, I very strongly feel like nobody should be making a film because they want to make people think, that kind of a sloganeering, at least in this kind of a form, because you'll essentially end up making something that's going to alienate the audiences because you either lecture at them or screech at them or, make them feel guilty for not feeling bad. And that kind of holding people by their lapels and saying, feel bad just has never worked. In fact, it does more disservice, right? So films are meant to be Trojan horses, and you have to be able to whisper to the better angels of people's nature, even when they don't want to have the conversation, right? So the challenge is if the film is able to move somebody who hates any climate-related thing, doesn't want to have a conversation about non-human life, doesn't want to have a conversation about, say, hates birds, like think of that kind of a hypothetical situation. The film should still be able to. And you essentially, what I'm saying is that when you're making the film, you don't think of any of this. You just, you work in the service of an anonymous truth in the sense of something that you feel intuitively has power, right? And you feel moved by it and you just follow the spine of it. Once the film is made, it starts landing in ways that find certain shapes. And then you realize, this is interesting. This is urban ecologists are interested in it. Ethologists are interested in it. People in climate are interested in it. The wildlife community is interested in it. Animal lovers are interested in it. People interested in South Asian politics are interested in it. And then slowly it finds kind of like these concentric circles where it expands. But most importantly, what really a film needs is it's not just the subset of these topical issues, but film lovers have to love it. That's the most, like, cinephiles have to love it, and that's when it really reaches out to the biggest pool. So the truth is that, of course, these bigger awards, I mean, the fact that it's grueling and, all the platitudes that you have heard of is, of course, one thing. And it, like, no point being moralistic or judgy about it. One knows what one is getting into, and it's a different galaxy of things. So it's one has to be strategic and tactical about this, because what it does is that it catapults the film into a kind of a common conversation to an outside world, which is outside of just the very niche circles that our films often are spoken in. So of course it's important. In terms of impact, it's important to have an impact strategy, but it has to be a belated thing. Once the film starts, you start realizing, okay, maybe we should show it in colleges, maybe we should have very key screenings for people who are either maybe activists, some people who are artists who work with nature or ecology, or those kinds of things. But what I'm trying to say is that it has to be organic to what the film is doing, instead of force fitting it into certain themes. And then popularity of the film, of course, helps. I mean, it being on HBO really helps. This film, after the Oscar nomination, for instance, got more views on the trailer, got more views on YouTube than I could imagine. So I would never actually, smugly patronize these more commercial avenues of things. The job is to make a film that is good and is also able to find a constituency outside.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's interesting, because we always encourage people to have an impact producer on board from as early as possible. But I hear what you're saying, that then that could compromise the artistic vision of the filmmaker. We're getting quite a lot of questions from the audience. I see in the Q&A, Monica Rovik from Westgrow in Cape Town says that she's enjoying the high-level questions, but pedantically, can you please include how we can support more people seeing this film? So she wants to know about the rollout. Will it be in theaters? Will we see it in other places in South Africa?
So the film released across the US, UK, Netherlands, and is going to release in India, hopefully soon. Otherwise, the film is available on HBO and different countries. If you don't get HBO, you have different services that provide. I don't offhand recall who's playing it in South Africa, but I can find out and let you know. If you don't have access to HBO, there will be a local service provider who will be showing the film.
Well, I'm sure that, there will be lots of organizations and people in South Africa that would jump at the chance to screen the film, to host a screening, host a discussion. There's a question from Minette van der Walt in the chat. She says, thank you for such a wonderful talk. I love what you said about access to subjects and time. I'm interested in the time that it took you to make the film. You mentioned 3 years of shooting, 8 months of editing. And I also understand that I'm adding to Minette, but I also understand that you edited while you were shooting, which is the best way, I think. On the documentary films that I've worked on, it helps so much to go back and forth between shooting and the edit suite. So Minette is asking, did you have certain targets that you were trying to reach? Did you know that it was going to take 3 years? And you were talking about things evolving organically with the Impact campaign. And she asks, did it turn out organically, the amount of time that you shot?
I mean, you have no control, right? You're in free fall. And essentially what happens is that the first year you think that's it, 1 year and I'm done. And then you realize, right, there's a mountain to climb. And, it's all a lot of times the quality is really a function of time. And I did not know that it's going to take 3 years. I think the good thing I did in this film, which was not what I did in my first film, which was a real mistake, is that I tried to neatly partition the edit from the shoot in the previous film, which is a bad idea. I really think you need to be editing through the film, especially the second half of it. So there's a kind of a cross-pollination between, when you're shooting, what you often get lost in is that you get lost in the relationship between the particular and the whole. So what happens is that even if you come back and edit one section and it looks like it's a very good 10-minute section, that might not work under the body or the cadence or rhythm of the whole film. So what you keep needing to do, especially when you have a mountain of footage of like, say, 300 hours, you need to keep sort of trimming it down and then like seeing what the broader trajectory is like. And then you'll realize, we need a filler here. It's going to get boring here. We need more levity here. And then because you're in the middle of the shoot, things start emanating and emerging. And you find that, okay, it's soon after the first year and a half, I realized that I was shooting according to a 3-act structure. And that gets imbibed almost intuitively because you're also watching the edit. And in the edit, you realize that certain pacing strategies for the camera and stuff and certain styles that you thought were working very well, that you thought were the cat's whiskers, don't actually work that well. So I did not know it would take this long. My only targets were that I cut the film in Copenhagen with this editor called Charlotte Bengtson and this other Indian editor called Vedant. And she had her time, so I had a sort of like deadline for that. But otherwise, no. You just like, you're dancing to a delirious tune then. So you have no sense of what's happening.
I find it interesting what you said about fillers and where things need to move, but your film is also really meditative and you allow a lot of breathing space, and I think that also allows people to read the film in different ways, which is really beautiful. It invites the audience into that meaning-making conversation, and I've seen it twice, and when I watched it the second time, the wallpaper of the political situation and the violence, I found it much more noticeable, where the first time I watched it, I was so stuck in the characters and, the aesthetic and a lot of other things that I hardly noticed the political conversations. I almost only remembered the scene where the wife talks about going to the protest with her husband. I think we have a few more questions. Carol Ann asks, please tell us about your financial backers and how you were able to keep them on board on this long, organic unfolding journey.
Right. I mean, the irony is that my first film was much smaller than this one, and this one I had more resources. And the irony I realized is that in order to be a big film, you have to ask for more money, and it's almost like a tautology, because they will give you money only if you ask for big money. And the reason that you ask for a bigger amount of money is because you need more time. So it's almost like, when we were, I think in the first year of the film, we were entirely dependent on grants. So, which is good because it gives you a sense of autonomy and a kind of street cred and so on. So we initially applied for and got, I think we got Sundance, IDFA, Catapult, and Tribeca.
Mhm.
And grants are great because, you know, you're working on, as you're writing out a proposal, you're also figuring out the film and so on. So you're finding a language. Then we were pitching at a ton of pitching forums, you know, the whole shebang, from IDFA to Sheffield to IFB New York to Hong Kong to like different places. Um, and most of this was the COVID year, so a lot of it was virtual. And then we uh, by the first year and a half, we had a good enough demo reel of about 15 minutes. We had a good sample. So then we were pitching, and we finally met our British producers, and then our American funders came on board. So it was really going through the grant system, then pitching, then meeting private equity, and that's how we funded the film. And in terms of how long it took, after the private equity came in, it took about a year and a half, which is very standard time. So it's not like it was longer than. I don't think anybody raised eyebrows about how long it took.
Mm. Great, thanks for sharing that. That's sort of the who's who of funders. Tasman Fosler says the cinematographic is such an integral part of the beauty of the film. How much did your DOPs inform the style and aesthetic? Was it an especially collaborative experience? Can you talk to the relationship with your shooters?
It was super collaborative because initially I was shooting myself, and I was doing this kind of a handheld style, and I realized that anything which is handheld feels a little nervous and anxious. You know, it embodies the camera person and feels a bit too fleshy and embodied. So, and the style I was looking for had to be more fluid and poetic and cinematic, and it was above my pay grade as a DP essentially. So we got this wonderful German cinematographer called Ben Bernhard, who shoots the films for Victor Kosakowski. And he came in to shoot for a while. And then there was an Indian cinematographer called Riju Das who continued it. And it was with the two of them that we slowly found this kind of a vocabulary of this slow lyrical kind of a style of, because we thought we have to make it feel like it's a fiction film, as if we are using the tools and toys of fiction film to tell a non-fiction story. So that kind of a thing only comes with a certain caliber of cinematography. So it was extremely collaborative, and it involved a lot of conversations, lots of reshoots of animals, lots of patient waiting, all of that, and really paying attention to, like fiction DPs do, to questions of light and movement and the aesthetics of it. So it was extremely, extremely intentional, the shooting.
Anita, there's one more question in the chat. Shall I take the question and then I'll hand back to you?
I'm happy to give you a little break. We have a question from a birder.
Mm.
And I don't know if you can see it, Shaunak, but Ian is saying, I think it's wonderful that the film deals with mundane and everyday birds, in this case, black kites. Oh, I don't know if they're everyday mundane, but I also see other raptors such as vultures, which are now highly endangered in India. And has your film had an impact on efforts to change popular knowledge about the negative impacts of veterinary drugs on the vulture population? This is quite an in-depth question here. I wish we could get Ian to come in and talk about it, but do you think film is leading to greater interest in those that share the air among Delhi residents? So I think it's really about, it's a question about impact, really.
So, well, the question of the vultures cast a kind of they're conspicuous by their absence, largely, Griffith vultures, because as the person who asked the question would know, that there was a big, almost this really tragic sort of almost quasi-extinction event where because of a chemical called diclofenac, the vulture population in Delhi died out, and that actually had a impact on the kite population because the kite population became really dense, and they are actually mundane everyday birds now because it's a very high population burst that has happened. The thing is that I think what's with the film, the good thing is that the brothers have had a real media spotlight on them, and they can talk about their work more and more. And a lot of people are now more aware of the singular and remarkable work that they do. And in that, of course, the conversation about the air and the birds and all of that is becoming bigger, and that's what that's what the impact of a film can be, to keep kind of entering the cultural bloodstream of things. And the conversation becomes bigger and bigger. And I think there are people who've in every screening we have tons of people who come up to us in India, in different cities, and talk about how they've now suddenly started paying attention to birds. So I suppose those things, but these are not things that one can really concretely measure and have a sense of.
Yeah, it's difficult to measure. I think it's related to a question I wanted to ask you, is that did you have any surprises in terms of who the film reached? Has anything happened along the way where you didn't expect to get certain types of audiences?
I mean, all of it is unexpected. If you had asked me when I was making the film, just the fact that it went to Sundance or went to Cannes or and won at all these places, and then had a theatrical release and in all these countries, and then went to the BAFTAs and the Oscars and all of that, is alone a huge thing. And what it does is that it momentarily for the year changes everybody's life, even for the brothers. Of course, this is a tricky conversation in the sense that you don't want to over-determine what a film can do, because it's not like a film can in one fell swoop completely change a family's life. But what it does is that there's a lot of media attention on them. The brothers are constantly traveling. The elder brother, Nadeem, actually probably went to more film festivals than I did. And, they're constantly moving around, and there's a lot of attention on them. Our producers very kindly funded the bird hospital for a year to come. So all of this was great because there are actual material changes that help alleviate. But at the same time, you don't want to over promise what a film can do. So I would say that there are clear things that have been helpful. It's impossible to say how much just yet. The jury's still out, I imagine. But there has been a positive impact, and I mean, every now and then there are donations that trickle in, but at times someone keeps hoping that there would be more, and they're not. At times there are windfall, so it's a uppy downy sort of a thing. But I'm just glad that the brothers for this 1 year could travel the world this extensively, and there was such a deep attention on their work and on what they do. So I'm glad to have provided witness to them.
Absolutely, and recognition. And just related to that, in terms of how you worked with the brothers, did you, as you were moving along, getting towards late cuts, did you involve them in watching rough cuts or collaborating?
Yeah, certainly. So while I was editing in Copenhagen, we would shoot on our phones sequences that we were editing and then send it to them and so on. And then, of course, they saw 2 different rough cuts, opined on them, etc. And then you have to do this kind of a tightrope dance where you, of course, want to respect their, if they're nervous about something in terms of security, you respect it fully. And then they have their say on what bits get left out. But at the same time, you're not making a advertisement or a hagiography or a NGO film on their bird hospital. So I also want to hold on to my editorial autonomy, So it's this kind of a delicate dance between being fully attentive to their concerns when it comes to security, but holding on to my autonomy when it comes to the narrative arc of the film, because that you can't just listen to the characters in terms of, because you also want to show different facets of them that you might differ with them on in terms of how you've shot and stuff. So you have to be sensitive while also being protective of your own artistic self.
That's really, really good advice. Liani, do you have anything else that you wanted to ask? And is anyone wanting to come in with additional questions? I think there's questions coming in that I can't actually see, Liani. So if there's any that you can see that.
I think all of the questions have been answered, including one that we haven't shared live. Shaunak, I wonder whether you would mind telling our guests where you are and what you're busy doing at the moment, your next project.
I'm in Bavaria at the moment, and I'm trying to write out something which I think is more of a, it started off as a kind of hybrid between fiction, non-fiction, but is moving towards fiction at the moment. So I don't know what shape it will take, but this also has to do with what can vaguely be called the ecological sublime. So I'm trying to write something out now.
Mm. And I'm struck by how both of your films have been centered and connected so strongly with the city, with the urban space. So I wonder whether the city features in this project as well.
I think it does, because me and the same directorial team worked with me for the last 2 films, and we're all very embedded in the vernacular and colloquial cultures of the city of Delhi. And, you know, it really helps to go deep into something in order to zoom out and say something bigger. So I don't know if somebody asked me to just make a film on, like, a documentary on Chicago, I wouldn't, it would take me time to embed myself. And so I think the city does and will feature, but I don't know, I mean, these things keep changing, right? So far it's been a very important character, but I don't know if that will continue to be the case.
Thank you so much. Anita?
Yes, no, I think we've dried up. We've had a full hour with you. It's been absolutely wonderful. I just want to thank you so much for making this film. You've brought this film into the world for us. It's a real gift. And thank you for your generosity of spirit, joining us here today and sharing openly with us. We really do appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is very nice to attend. Thank you.
We hope to be able to host you physically at some point.
I hope so too. I've never been, so I really hope so.
Well, there are a bunch of people at my and other universities that would love to bring you out. So I think we should chat. And just so that you know, your screening in Cape Town this week was absolutely packed, and people raved about your film. The responses were incredible, and people really were struck by the characters, the aesthetic, the story, all of those wonderful things that we've spoken about that stand out so much about your film.
Thank you. That's really lovely to hear. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for attending today.
Bye-bye.
And I hope to see as many of you who are in Joburg at the screening on Sunday. Thanks very much.
And thank you so much to Encounters Festival for allowing the Climate Story Lab to collaborate and support. And we've had a great time, and we look forward to all of the other wonderful industry events that are coming up. There's something happening pretty much every day. Please go and check out the Encounters website. The industry schedule is there, and all of the different events and the links to register for the events. And we hope to see you virtually or in person until Sunday.
Yep. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.